We recently had the celebration of the New Year in the Western world, according to the Gregorian calendar. And also, we have had Chinese New Year being celebrated around this time. And very soon, we are going to have the Baha'i New Year celebrated in 21st of March, which is the beginning of spring, also is the time that all Iranians celebrate. So New Year's coming constantly. And it is a tradition that at the beginning of a new year, we begin to reflect on life, on what has passed, and what we want to do in the future. And this is good because we have to be self-conscious and aware about life. Life constantly goes by. Time doesn't stop. Even if we stop, the time wouldn't. So that's the problem. So I came across this statement of Abdul Baha that prayed that this year maybe peace will be established in the world. And it brought me back to the notion that, of course, peace has been the quest of humanity from the dawn of consciousness. Ever since humanity has lived on this planet, we had wanted to have peace. And I began to reflect on my own experiences with regard to peace. So tonight I'm going to be, as usual, selfish, and I'm going to share with you a kind of a story of my work thus far in the area of peace. For 30 years, I practiced psychiatry, which, when I reflect on it, I realized that all I did was try to help people to regain some peace, either inner peace or interpersonal peace or marriage peace or peace between parents and children or peace in a small community like a school or further beyond that and so forth. So my work as a psychiatrist was really to help people to have some degree of peace. And then in 1992, 93, when I thought I was retired and had come back from East to Victoria, Roshan, my son, was at law school here in Victoria. And he and I began to reflect on the issue of conflict. What is conflict? Why conflict is so universally present? Why people have so much conflict? And as we began to reflect on it, we started focusing on the writings of the faith on the one hand, and the literature on the conflict on the other hand. And we realized that the two are totally at odds with each other. The literature on conflict, the scientific current scientific idea of conflict is that human beings are by nature conflicted, that it is not possible to get rid of conflict, that conflict is a part of life. And therefore, all we can do is to learn how to control it, how to deal with it effectively. But conflict is with us always. And then when we study the writings of the Baha'i faith, we see that, for example, Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha have said that conflict is totally forbidden, that you shouldn't be conflicted. How? And then we know that the Baha'i faith has to be in accord with science. So then, how you are going to bring the two together? How we are going to, on the one hand, accept that human beings by nature are conflicted, and on the other hand, accept the spiritual command that we shouldn't be conflicted, because if we are by nature conflicted, we are conflicted, we can't get rid of it. It was during this time that we began to realize that probably our understanding of conflict is wrong. And we came to a simple conclusion, namely that conflict is absence of something, in the same way that disease is absence of health. Conflict is absence of unity, in the same way that disease is absence of health. And therefore, if we want to be free from conflict, we have to learn the ways of unity. And based on that, we developed a system of conflict resolution, which we called it conflict-free conflict resolution. Okay, we played on the words and wanted to be cute, and we called it conflict-free conflict resolution. Later, we called it peace-based conflict resolution and unity-based conflict resolution. But conflict-free conflict resolution was the one that we wrote a number of articles about it and published. And this work we did when we were at Landeck, because in 1993, after 9 months of retirement, we were invited to go to Switzerland, to Landeck, and we left. And when we were there, Roshan and I continued our work, and we developed conflict-free conflict resolution. During that same time, when I arrived at Landeck, I noticed that among the programs that they had at Landeck Academy at that time was a program called Education for Peace, which the children of this gentleman were attending, right? Where are they? Yes, they were attending Education for Peace. And the Education for Peace program had started by Dr. Ayman and Iraj Ayman and his wife. And as soon as I heard the word Education for Peace, the title, it captured my imagination. And decided to actually have the program organized as an experiment. And I dramatically changed the contents of the program and invited a number of educators and other specialists to come and help. And we developed a program. We wanted to see what happens with young people. And the program was people between 11 and 14, 15. And they were coming 3 years in a row in the summer for 2 weeks. And they were coming from a number of countries around the world. And we wanted to see what happens to people, to young people, if you give them some ideas about what is peace and what does it mean to become a peaceful person, and what does it mean to be a peacemaker. And this was an experiment. And as we were doing that, during those years, a very violent, barbaric war was taking place in early part of 1990s, 1993 to 95, in former Yugoslavia. And the war was truly barbaric. And in 1995, the international community finally got involved. And they stopped the active fighting between the people. And they tried to create some degree of peace. And a large number of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, from around Europe, and Americas, Canada and United States, went to Bosnia-Herzegovina in order to help people to get out of the ruins of the war. But things were not very successful. Many of the programs were short-lived and usually focused on conflict. Whose fault it was, and who started the war, and who was the victim, and who was the wrong person, the wrong side of the process. And the programs were not very successful. And to be honest with you, I was totally unaware of what was happening at all. I was very focused on what we were doing at Atlantic, and I wasn't paying attention at all to Bosnia-Herzegovina. And then in 1999, we received an invitation via Baha'i International Community to go and hold a 3-day workshop on conflict-free conflict resolution. They have heard about conflict-free conflict resolution, and because they had tried many other programs and nothing had worked, so they said, well, let's give this one a chance. So they invited 50 journalists and a number of government officials and few educators and dignitaries and so forth to this 3-day workshop in Sarajevo. And Roshan and I went. And at that time, when you would go to the airport of Sarajevo, the airport was a dilapidated, really run-down place with bullet holes all over the walls and everything. It was a very, really upsetting place. And you would get in the car, and as you drive through the town, both sides, you would see the buildings that were half ruined, the bullet holes were everywhere, and makeshift cemeteries were all around the road that you would go in town and within town. It was a most depressing place possible. So we go there, and the program started Thursday evening with a dinner, which was, yes, It was lousy. It was really awful in terms of food, in terms of atmosphere, in terms of everything. People were very tense. Nobody talked with each other. And later we were going to stay at this hotel. And the following morning, I learned that some of the participants at 12 o'clock midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, they asked the organizer of the event to move them to another hotel. And they said, we cannot sleep here. We cannot sleep in the same hotel with our enemies. And so these were the participants, okay? So in middle of the night, they had to find another hotel place for them and send them there. So that was the atmosphere that was created. So the following morning we came, and we were told privately that this has happened. And we started our program. And by that evening, the whole group was dancing and singing together. They were hugging each other, they were crying, they were dancing. And because all of them had the same language, they all were the same country they knew each other. So the language, the songs, everything they knew. So, but they hadn't for 5 years. They had not communicated with each other at all. And in the course of the day, I wish I had time to tell you what happened. A dramatic transformation took place. And by the evening, that was the situation. So the following morning, I was asked, I wasn't invited, I was asked to go and meet with the Minister of Education of the Federation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. And fortunately, 2 people came with me. One was the senior representative of international community, which was in charge of the country at that time, OHR, Office of High Representative. The senior person in the charge of education was at the meeting, and he was very excited about it. He came with me. And the sponsor of the event, which was the ambassador of the government of Luxembourg, and he came. And the 3 of us went, and we met with the Minister of Education, Dr. Fakhruddin, and he had a PhD in education, and he had been in concentration camp during the war. And after war, he was chosen as the Minister of Education for the Federation part, but not for the Serbian part. They were separated. And he said, what did you do last night? Yesterday. I said, I'm innocent. He said, no, really, what did you do? I said, what do you mean? He said, in the morning, they were totally estranged with each other. In the evening, I've been reported that something has happened that hadn't happened for 5 years. What did you do? So I described to him what I have done. And I told him about the Education for Peace program and what we have been doing at our university and academy in London. And he said, I want you to bring this program to schools in Bosnia. And at that time, I have been developing the program with the idea of taking it to Kosovo in order to prevent another war. And I said, Mr. Minister, I have had the idea of taking it to Kosovo so that hopefully we would prevent the war there. He said, no, you are coming here. And he turned to the ambassador of government of Luxembourg and said, and Mr. Ambassador, your government is going to cover the money. And that is how the program started. So we got a very generous grant from the government of Luxembourg to start a pilot project of Education for Peace program. And we then came in December 1999, a few months later, 3 months later, to interview and choose the schools. Our idea was to choose 6 schools, 3 secondary, 3 primary schools. 1 each of the 3 warring groups. In Bosnia-Herzegovina war, there were 3 groups that they were at war with each other. There were Bosniaks, who are Muslims, primarily, Croats, who are Catholics, and Serbs, who are Orthodox Christians. These people have been living together for several hundred years, and they have had periodic wars among each other. They call it the Bosnian or Balkan curse. Every 50 years, they had some kind of a war and fight with each other. But during the communist era, especially during the time of Tito, they were at peace. And because of communism, they were ordered to forget about religion and put the religious ideas in the background and so forth. So people were primarily non-religious or not openly practicing religion. And they started marrying each other and intergroup marriages and so forth. And the whole country for about 50 years was in a very, very harmonious, albeit authoritarian condition. In essence, Marshal Tito said, be nice to each other or I kill you. So the choice was obvious. So they were nice to each other and they proved to be really very nice to each other. But when Tito went and the authoritarian power was removed, the country went into crisis, and religious leaders and academics and politicians took advantage of the situation. And they brought back hatreds of the past. And they created a war that was truly barbaric. I can't recount to you the episodes that had happened there because it would be most disturbing to hear. But the main element of that was killing of all young men from 10, 11 upward, raping of all women, young women, and other unbelievable acts of inhumanity. So we wanted to create an atmosphere in which we would choose 2 schools from Serb group, 2 schools from Croat group, and 2 schools from Bosniak group, because these are the groups that have been at fight with each other. Before the war, these schools were integrated. After the war, they were segregated. They were all separate from each other. So we wanted to bring them back together. So we thought that we would develop a program, a special kind of a program, and we chose the schools. And the way we chose the schools, we said to them, give us 1 best school in your area and one the most difficult school in your area. Okay? So we had 3 really excellent schools from each group and 3 really difficult schools. Altogether, we had 6,000 students and about several thousand parents and 800 teachers or so. And they became the pilot project. I cannot go through the examples of how we chose the schools because it would take a long time. But I give you one indication of, you see how difficult it was to just to see the situation. In a small city of Travnik. Travnik used to be the capital of Bosnia under Ottoman Empire for 300 years. But then when Ottoman Empire collapsed after the First World War, Travnik no longer was a place of importance, and it just deteriorated and became smaller and so forth. So Travnik had 2 sets of populations, Bosniaks and Croats. And these people all knew each other, but nevertheless, they had separated from each other. And the history books that they were choosing in Croat schools and Bosniak schools recounted the history of Bosnia exactly the opposite way. So the Bosniaks would learn how awful were the Croats, and the Croats would learn how awful were the Bosniaks. So the Office of High Representative, international representatives, have ordered the schools take their textbooks and take out those sections that are negative towards the other group. So the day that we were interviewing the schools to choose the schools in Travnik, the head of the Office of Education of OHR, International Community, was also there to check to see what they have done with the textbooks. And when he went and looked at the textbooks, to his horror found that they had used markers. So instead of taking it out, actually highlighted it. Okay? And he came there to our interviews. And to his surprise, he realized that we have chosen 2 schools, one Croat and one Bosniak. No, it's very interesting. In Travnik, which is a canton of its own, they had a Ministry of Education. The minister was Bosniak, and the vice minister, deputy minister, was a Croat. They never have met. They never have met. They never have done anything together. Okay? They were neighbors, but they haven't done it. And when we came and we talked with them and we told them what we do separately, they both agreed. So suddenly we went to each of them and say, he has agreed. To the minister, and we said the deputy minister has agreed. We went to deputy minister and said, minister has agreed. They were so surprised. They came, they shook hands, and they called the local television station. And they came and took the news. And it was the news that for the first time since the war, the minister and the deputy minister have visited with each other and have agreed to have a project together. That was the way the program started. And in every place that we went, it was like that. It was just remarkable how the notions that we gave them captured their imaginations right away, and they said, we agree. They said, yeah, we agree. We will do that. We would allow you to do that. Okay. So we chose these schools, and our idea was that we would implement a program at each of these schools in the hope that some degree of peace would take place in there. Okay. So to begin with, we said, okay, each school would send between 2 and 4 teachers, depending on their size. They would choose them the best one, those who also spoke English, for the first group of Education for Peace trainers, that they would be in their schools as the trainers. So altogether, we chose 18 teachers and a translator, 19. And we brought them to Landic. And we brought them to Landic, 19 people, and they came there for 9 days. And we gave them the training on the principles of education for peace. Now, the principles of education for peace gradually evolved, and they are now in 13 volumes. This is volume 1. Okay. This is volume 1 of the Principles of Education for Peace. Then 2 other volumes like this. This is Education for Peace Curriculum Manual for Teachers. Then we have 2 smaller size Education for Peace Curriculum Manual for students, lower grades and upper grades. And then we have a number of other programs. For example, this book, which is called Peace Moves. Peace Moves is an account, imaginary account, of 9 young people sitting together and saying there is no hope. This world is in bad shape. Look at the economy, look at the environment, look at the political situation, look at the wars that are going on. There is no hope. And they start talking among themselves what they are going to do. Is peace possible or not? And they go from stage to stage to stage, and they go argue back and forth until finally, at the end, they decide that you're going to be peacemakers. This is a story. And it became the favorite book of students. About probably 100,000 of these were published and given to students all across the Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this became their Bible. They loved it. Because what they would do, they would identify with the characters in the book, and they would follow it, and they would, and then we, in the later volumes that we had, editions that we had, we actually created empty pages that the student that would read then also enter his or her own argument and become a part of the book. So at the end, the book they become co-authors of the book, okay, because they add to the book. So it became really a favorite of them. They loved it. And so we began to gradually teach what is peace and how we can become a peacemaker. And at the core of this is the whole issue of worldview. Every human being has a worldview. Every one of us have a worldview, a mindset through which we see the world. In the same way that we have glasses, we see the world through our glasses, through our worldview. And worldview has 4 components. Our view of reality, our view of human nature, our view of purpose of life, and our view of human relationships. Every one of us has a worldview, and we develop our worldview from our experiences at home, through education, and through life experiences that we have. And our worldview is unconscious. We are not consciously going around saying, what is my worldview? Okay? Rather, we look at things and judge things. And you have the same phenomena here, and all of us here looking at this phenomena, and each of us see it somewhat differently. Why we see it differently is not because the phenomena here is different. It's because each of us have a different worldview. Okay? And there are fundamentally 3 main categories of worldview. 2 of which are conflict-based. One worldview is the power-based worldview. It's the idea that the most important thing in this life is power. Okay? And control of other people, which creates an authoritarian worldview, which has been the most common worldview in human history. Religions have been organized in an authoritarian manner in the past. Governments have been authoritarian. Men have been authoritarian. Families have been authoritarian. Schools have been authoritarian. And still many of them are authoritarian. That's one worldview. The second category of worldview is based on the idea of identity and individualism and competition, and so-called multi-party adversarial democracy, which is the modern worldview that we have. These 2 worldviews have ruled the world, and these 2 worldviews are conflict-based, and they inevitably result in conflict, one form or another. A third worldview is just beginning to emerge, and that worldview is unity-based worldview. That there is one humanity, there is one earth, and so forth. But this is by no means an accepted worldview. The other 2 are accepted worldviews. Unity-based worldview is not accepted, but is beginning to emerge, okay, in the consciousness of people. Ever since, people don't know, but is ever since the advent of revelation of Baha'i. But anyway, so these are 3 worldviews. So what we did, we brought the 19 people in Landig, and we said, we all have worldview, And what we are going to do, we are going to describe the categories of worldview for you, the first two, okay? And what we want you to do is to think yourself about what is your worldview. Don't tell anybody. It is just for you to decide how is your worldview. Well, this put the people in extreme degree of confusion. Several of them told me that during the whole week, practically they didn't sleep at all because they were so surprised to find out that the three groups that they have been at war with each other had identical worldviews. Mm-hmm. They all had the same worldview. They all did things from the same perspective. And they were totally surprised. Because until then, they were said, we are good, they are bad. But suddenly, they said they are all the same. They have the same worldview. And that dramatically changed them. It was amazing, the level of transformation that took place in these 19 people during that week that we were together. So we did that, and then we had to choose a number of individuals. I decided that we would choose 6 international EFP trainers who, along with these 18 Bosnian trainers, would be divided among the 6 schools and would help to bring the program of education for peace to every classroom, to every subject, every day, all days during the whole academic year. Okay. In other words, if you are studying geography or sports or mathematics or biology or history, the teacher would say, okay, let us think about history from perspective of peace. Let us think biology from perspective of peace. Because biology is, they teach about what? Survival of the fittest. And say, no, let's think about where are the areas of complementarity, for example, and so forth. It is a very, I cannot go through the details of the philosophy of the program, but anyway, a new way of teaching. You would teach the same subject, but you teach it differently. Think about it differently, okay? And so we had to choose the trainers, international trainers. And I decided that our international trainers would be people who know education for peace, who would be humble, who would be, to the extent possible, themselves peaceful, who would be united and peaceful among themselves, and who wouldn't be threatening to teachers that they were going to work with. So I chose 6 people, 5 of whom were our students at London. And one was from outside that had attended one of our conferences in Turkey, and she decided that she wanted to be a part of it. And she came. So that was the 6th person. And then I invited the ambassador of Luxembourg and the representative of the international organization, OHR, to come to Landig to meet with the faculty. And we came, I never forget that. We sat there, and they turned to me, the two of them, and said, okay, let's see the faculty. So I brought these 6 people in, 5 women, 1 man. Average age, 23. Okay. These young people. They shook hands and introduced. And then the ambassador turned to me and said, okay, can we meet the faculty now? I said, this is the faculty. You should have seen his face. He said, this is the faculty. I said, yeah. He said, can we talk privately? I said, yes. So we kicked the young people out. And he said, here you're sending these young kids to a country that has been at war, that now we keep order in the city and in the schools through our international soldiers and police and everything that we have. You're sending these kids there to be the educators of peace for these people? So yeah. And I described it to him why you're doing it. He wasn't convinced, but he didn't have a choice. It had gone too far. Okay. Well, these 6 people were dynamites. They were so remarkable. They were so excellent. People fell in love with them. They became known throughout the country. They were outstanding examples of how you become agents of transformation in a society. It was just remarkable. I myself would go only about once every 6 weeks, 5, 6 weeks. I would go to Bosnia for a number of days and do the training and all kind of things that we do. But they were living there, and they were going to schools. They weren't going to classrooms unless they invited. But the idea was to encourage all the teachers in these schools to begin to teach the subjects according to the principles of peace. And the principles of peace were 4. 1, first principle, humanity is one. Second principle, oneness of humanity is expressed in diversity. Third principle, the greatest opportunity before humanity is to strengthen its oneness and to nurture its diversity. And the fourth principle is to accomplish this task through unity rather than through conflict. These were the 4 that we, these are all the things that we put together. These are the part of, the curriculum of education for peace. So these are the things we wanted to teach young people. Okay. And whatever study they were studying was to be studied within these parameters. So we had a dilemma now. The dilemma was, how do you monitor whether teachers are doing it or not doing it? Because after all, these people have been at war with each other. They have been fighting with each other. They have had very, very rough time with each other. Many of them were nationalists. How are you going to monitor it? So what we did, we said that every school, or put it differently, every classroom, with the participation of all the students under the guidance of their teacher, the students would develop a 5-minute artistic presentation in the form of drama, music, songs, audiovisual, poetry, doesn't matter, okay? And every classroom would do it, every semester. And at the end of each semester, we are going to have a peace event in which every member of the school community, all students, all teachers, everybody would be involved. And all parents would be invited. The school community would be invited. The authorities of the city would be invited, everybody. And they would come together and perform in front of everybody. Their understanding of one or another concepts of peace as they apply to their areas of study. Okay? So that was the idea, peace event. So we had the first 6 peace events. And it was amazing to see what happened. So you would go to a peace event, and you remember, these are now kids, 6-year-old kids, from 6-year-old to 18-year-olds. So the little ones, of course, they would have their parents involved and their grandparents, and everybody has to come and watch that the little ones are going to perform and so forth. The big ones also had to talk with their parents what they are doing and so forth. And so parents were involved, actively involved. And the first series of 6 peace events that we had, we observed that there were 3 types of presentations. One were presentations that were right on. The students have understood the concept. For example, the concept of, let's say, unity in diversity, or concept of interreligious harmony, or the concept of gender equality. The students had chosen different concepts out of this book, Peace Moves, and they had prepared presentations, okay? So about about one third, they have understood it, and they put on really excellent programs. Another third were exactly the opposite. They were talking about nationalism. They put the songs that they would put, "You're greatest," the Serbs are the greatest, the Bosniaks are the greatest, and this and that, and so forth. And another one in the middle who were totally confused. They had one foot this side and one foot the other. They didn't totally understand what was going on. But at least they tried, okay? After the presentations, the parents of the worst group went to their teachers and to school administrators, and they said, "Why you're teaching this garbage to our kids? Why you're not teaching our kids to do the other ones?" And when the teacher said that we have, we are Serbs or we are Croats and so forth, and the parents said, "We were stupid, we got in the war with each other. We don't want our children to go through the same thing. We want them to teach." So they became the main force to change the community of the school. It It was amazing what happened. Based on that, we decided that we are going to take the best presentations from each school, 6 schools, and go to the city of the enemy and put the presentations on. This was the first time that any groups in Bosnia and Herzegovina since the war had done that. And we chose, the first place that we chose was in Republika Srpska. The Republika Srpska, the capital of it is what? Anyway, it would come. This city and this whole republic, they were the aggressors. They were the soldiers. They were the ones that did the fighting, okay? And came and siege of Sarajevo and the killing of Banja Luka is the capital. And we took the first group, the first inter-school performance took place in Banja Luka. When we were taking people in the bus from Sarajevo to Banja Luka, people were so nervous that a number of them began to vomit. They were so frightened of what was going to happen to them. This was the first time they had traveled to a city of enemy, and the main enemy, okay? But when we went there, it was an amazing scene because the schools had arranged a welcome and they had arranged food and the students stood there and they began to hug everybody. It was unbelievable event, okay? It was unbelievable. And this, of course, had been done by our 2 young people who were there, who have been training them along with the other teachers that were there. It was transformative. The whole thing was a transformative process. We are not going to be able to finish this story. I'm just going to tell you 1 or 2 more stories and then possibly we'll continue at another time, okay? One of the things that we did was to train all school staff in principles of education for peace. In other words, from director to janitor, everybody received the main training, usually a 2-day workshop, in principles of education for peace. Everybody was involved, okay? Because you cannot create peace by having somebody excluded. Everybody has to be included. Peace requires inclusion, not exclusion, okay? That's why Abdul Baha says that limited unities are dangerous. The world right now is the world of limited unities. Nationality is a limited unity. Different religions are limited unities. Race, limited unity. Different economic agreements are limited unities, and on and on. Limited unity is dangerous. Universal unity is required, okay? Universality. So if you want to teach peace, everybody has to be included. So we said to these authoritarian schools, we said, yeah, we are going to give training and everybody has to be involved in the same place. I remember in one of the schools, they said, can the senior staff have a different training? I said, why? Do you think the peace for the senior staff would be different from the peace for the junior, peace for everybody is the same. They didn't want to be in the same room with the janitors. Director and janitor never they sat together. And suddenly we brought them, and janitors and the people in the lower echelon, they would put the best clothes on, and they would come. You should have seen, because they never have been put in that place of honor to be in the same room with everybody else, you see. So it was a very exciting process. So the first time that I did the training in Baneluka, about 80 teachers and the staff were there. And I remember I mentioned that the Baneluka is the capital of the Serb part of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and they were the aggressors during the war. So among the people were some soldiers who had done God knows what. So as I began to talk, people said, "You're an agent of United States. You're an agent of European Union. What do you know about Bosnia? What do you know about our glorious history? We are, custodians of huge civilization. You are trying to take away that from us." And they wouldn't let me talk. So they went on and on for about 10 minutes. I said, "Well, you're right. I don't know about your glorious history. Why don't you teach me?" So I came and sat down. And I said, "A number of you, please come and teach me." So 8 of them came and sat in the front. And I went and sat there. And okay, I said, "Tell me." So they started talking a little bit about history. And they started disagreeing among each other. And then they started fighting with each other. And they said, "Shut up, get out. We don't want to talk with you." And then the rest of the group, 80 people, said, "Get out of here. We don't want to listen to you. Let the professor talk." And so they brought me back. So I started talking. And as I started talking about a number of issues that have a deep psychological impact, I noticed a gentleman in the audience getting more and more and more agitated. And in front of everybody, he had a full-blown psychotic episode. A full-blown psychotic episode. So much so that they had to call the police and ambulance and take him to hospital. So we went through this process. 6 months later, I came back for another training in that school. And he was there. And he came to me and said, what I want to do, I want to participate. I said, "Perfectly fine." He said, "I want to videotape the whole thing." I said, "Okay." So he went and sat there, up there in the auditorium. And he was in charge of the videotaping. I said, "Why you want to videotape?" He said, "Because I want to remember everything." So he had obviously recovered enough and developed enough of understanding of the dynamics of peace, and realizing that we weren't accusing him of anything, that he had relaxed and so forth. Later, I was meeting with about 40 or more students in the higher level grades. And I was telling them that in life, we shouldn't be satisfied to be ordinary. Who wants to be ordinary? We all have to try to be extraordinary. And then I said, how many extraordinary people you know in history? So people started thinking, and they said, somebody said Gandhi. I said, oh, that's nice. Yeah. And somebody said Jesus. Okay. Somebody said Martin Luther King. All right. Somebody said Mother Teresa. All right. And one or two names were given. And I said, isn't that interesting? They didn't have anybody else. And said, you notice what you did? I said, what? I said, well, you only mentioned peacemakers. Mm-hmm. Peacemakers are extraordinary. Okay? You didn't mention Einstein, or you didn't mention Beethoven, or you didn't mention any of those. You are familiar with those. And those are extraordinary people. But when you were thinking of extraordinary people, who did you mention? You mentioned peacemakers. He said, that's what we want you to be. We want you all to become peacemakers so that you will be all extraordinary. And one young lady got up and said, yeah, I have decided to be extraordinary, but what about our fathers? Okay? What about our fathers? Because it is the fathers who go for war. Okay? And then young man got up and he said, yes, I want to be extraordinary. I'm going to be the extraordinary as a peacemaker. But what about those people who are extraordinary as war mongers? So we talked about it. When the meeting ended, the principal of school came to me and said, do you know who was that young man? I said, no. He said, that young man is the son of the most renowned general in the army of Bosnia, of Republic Srpska, who and he and his wife have been in hiding now since the war. And they are sought by the International Court in The Hague for activities that they did in the war. And their son now gets up and says he's going to become a peacemaker. So you see the dramatic event, the dramatic outcome of that. One more thing, and I stop. When we started the Education for Peace program, we thought we had one objective, was to create certain degree of peace in each school. Okay. After year and a half, we realized that we have not only created a culture of peace, but we have created a culture of healing in the school. I gave the story of culture of healing in one of my talks previously, so I wouldn't repeat it here. Many of you have heard it. But anyway, sometimes hopefully we will do that. And then the teachers and school administrators and parents came to us and said that something unusual has happened. Namely that the level of academic excellence has gone up and the level of behavioral excellence has gone up. They said that we see less number of fights. Many students have stopped drinking or taking drugs. Prostitution that has been quite problem solved has stopped. They say our students are changing behaviorally and academically. So we realized that education for peace fundamentally does three things at the same time. Creates a culture of peace, a culture of healing, and a culture of excellence. So one issue that you should know is that the whole thing, education for peace, the whole idea, all of the contents, all of the activities, they just evolved. I really cannot take a credit for them. I look back and I don't realize, I don't know how they came about, how those ideas came about, how those activities happened, how we were protected in a country like that. Because eventually, education for peace was taken to every school in that country. The government expanded it and expanded it and expanded it. So much so that every school in Bosnia-Herzegovina, from kindergarten to university, in 2012, when we stopped the program because we didn't have funds anymore, were involved. Okay. Now it is in their hands of what they are doing, and God knows what they are doing. But it is, I think the whole thing is a reminder that when we embark upon a project, for example, peace, and we try our best to do it, the confirmations come in ways that we even can't imagine. And people appear to help that you never thought that would happen. This mysterious dimension of it requires more talking, which we would do some other time. Thank you for your patience. I'm sorry I thought it took such a long time.
Thank you.
من یه سوال اولا من خیلی I enjoyed very much your talk and I learned a lot as I expected to be here. But you were talking about individually have different minds. What kind of mind you are talking about? Is it just looking with physical eye or mind or what?
Yeah, your mindset.
Your mindset.
Yeah, the way we understand this life and the reality of life, okay? Most people have a dichotomous view of reality. That means that most people think that reality is composed of good and bad. Good people and bad people. Okay? Therefore, human nature, good people will good people and good bad people. And then the idea would be that in life, you would get rid of the bad people and make the world full of good people. Okay? Which then describes your relationships. So mindset means the way we understand the realities of this life, how this life is real, what is our nature. For example, in Christianity, the idea is that human beings are by nature sinful. Okay? if you think by nature you're sinful, you are going to have a very difficult time with yourself. Okay? Baha'u'llah says exactly the opposite. Noble have I created thee. It's a change of mindset. It's a change of worldview, you see. The process, for example, when a person becomes a Baha'i, the main thing that happens is the change of worldview, is the change of mindset. The way we look at the world, the way we look at ourselves, we look at realities. And that changes. That's the work of revelation. The revelation is when it brings a new mindset to the world of humanity, a new way of looking at life, at realities of life, at human relationships, at human nature, at the purpose of life. Is that clear?
Yes, but again, when we said mind, is that mind for education, for environmental, or psychological? Or
all of them. Mindset means everything that makes you you. Okay, makes you you. Is the soul, personality, everything. Mindset means when a person says myself, the self of the individual, not an ego, not ego, the self, the reality of human being. Okay, that is formed through education, through life experiences, through all of this, and it becomes a mindset. And that's the way we look at life, and it becomes a habit. And unless we consciously ask ourselves, what is my mindset, and try to change it, then we don't. That's a different story. Hopefully we will talk about it some other time.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
It reminds me of that poem in Farsi that says پیش چشمت داشتی شیشه کبود لاجرم عالم کبودت.
That's right. Yeah.
You had the purple colored lenses in front of your eyes. Therefore, everything that you saw.
Yeah. Yeah. If my glasses were dark, all of you would look darker. It's as simple as that, So if my glass is, this world is dangerous, I would see you all as dangerous people. You see? Mm-hmm. If I thought that people were not trustworthy, that's mindset, then I wouldn't trust people. It doesn't matter who they are, you see? And this is the world that has happened right now in our world today. All right, we are going to.
On a happy note, I just wanted to add this. When we look at the community of humanity, we have had only 10,000 years. Nothing compared to the eternity that is planned by God. That we have come along and we will have a long way to go still. But the end result is divine civilization.
Well, we are on the journey of eternity.
Yes,
see,
exactly.
You're on the journey of eternity. Yes.
You mentioned that the funding for the program ended in 2012. Was that the program being carried out in Bosnia-Herzegovina, or what is the current status of the education?
We had to raise funds every year for our project. So from 1999 until 2012, every year, we were able to raise enough money from different governments. Luxembourg was the first one, Switzerland, Japan, Canada, a little bit United States, United Kingdom, a number of countries, many countries. Every year, Norway and so forth, we were able to raise enough money to expand our program and take our program to more schools and more universities. But in 2012, we no longer could raise any money. And the reason was that all of these countries that would give money, they said, now we have to go to Afghanistan and to Syria and to Iraq because they are in trouble and we have to take the money there. Sorry, we don't have any more money for Bosnia, okay? So we couldn't raise any more money. And that's what happened. So we went to the government of Bosnia-Herzegovina, all 13 ministries of education and all 10 or 11 pedagogical institutes and all 6 universities. They all have been in collaboration with us. We have trained most of their staff and people. And we said, okay, the program now is in your hand. And all of the books have been translated and published and given to them. So you should continue. And some of them are continuing and some of them are not. Okay. This is the situation. But since then, of course, other countries have started implementing the program. Now we are very active in Mexico, to a lesser degree in Colombia. And we recently have started training of a number of educators and university professors from West Africa. So we are working. My hope is that we could bring the program to Canada and United States. But in order to do so, we need a different methodology and thinking and so forth. So my hope is to consult with educators in Canada to see what they think and what is their view of how possibly the program can be taken to schools here, you see. Until now, my focus has been international. But I think there is a room, a need for this kind of a program in the, to decrease the bullying and decrease the conflict in schools and tension in schools. This program is dramatically good, effective. And it is my hope that we can experiment it here also.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.